Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Thomas L. Friedman and Sebastian Thrun.
Sebastian, welcome. I was thinking as I was listening to my colleagues there, and it was a great panel. People know I love to play golf, and I used to cover the Middle East, so I still read Haaretz, the Israeli daily, online every day. And I don't know, I went and bought some golf clubs online from Golfsmith, and a few days later I picked up Haaretz, and there was an ad on the front page for golf clubs. And I thought, that's so cool, Israel's getting into golf, you know? I didn't realize somebody had sold my data to Haaretz, and suddenly they were advertising golf clubs on their front page. Sebastian, it's a treat to have you here. And for those of you who don't know, Sebastian and his colleague at Stanford are really the fathers of the MOOC movement.
And mothers.
And mothers. And I wonder if you could just tell us about that moment when you realized that this is something that could go beyond your classroom.
It was a kind of a freak experiment. About pretty much 3 years ago, a colleague of mine, Peter Norvig, and I, who teach a joint class, decided to send out one email saying, there's a Stanford class, and everybody's invited to take it for free. And we expected 5,000, 10,000 people, and we got 160,000 students. We had more students in Lithuania than Stanford has students in one class. And we started teaching it online using the internet. And in the process, we were able to compare Stanford students with those online students taught the same course on Stanford's campus. And what we found is that the top 412 students were online students, and the strongest Stanford student out of a class of 200 was number 413.
Wow.
That made me realize we might be up for something. We might not be serving the world, we should be serving it. In addition to it, the cost of this experiment was about $1 per student. And compare this to a tuition rate of $50,000.
Fantastic. And what was then your next move?
The next move is, first we told our dean we're doing this.
What did the dean say?
The dean had said, I wish you told me. And we had wrestling about what the right certificate would be. Obviously, he didn't want to give a Stanford certificate to 160,000 students. Mm-hmm. But I decided it's time to really dive in and understand whether we can make this medium work. This was just experiment number one. And in many ways, it was lousy. It was really deficient. Can we really invent a new education medium that can empower people and make education part of our daily fabric? And that's what I'm doing today. I'm running a startup company. As every startup person, I believe, is the next big thing. It's called Udacity. But more than that, I really believe we can induce not just my company, our partner companies like AS and Coursera, and many others can really induce societal change to really make learning much, much bigger.
So let's talk about the macro perspective that I alluded to in my talk. I'm really interested, and I think people here would be, how do you see the world of work evolving? And therefore, what do you think that means for education and online education in particular?
I think you and Andrew really nailed the point. About 2 generations ago, we had one job for a lifetime. Today, the Bureau of Labor reports that the average tenure is about 4.6 years. And with Uber, Airbnb, and other companies, we go to employment on demand. It might be that employment lasts for a day, for a week. And that puts enormous pressure on the workforce to stay educated. This is compounded by the fact that we're losing low-skilled opportunities, and technology is advancing at an accelerating pace, so education expires faster. To me, what this really means is we have to make education part of the daily fabric. Larry Page often talks about the toothbrush test. It's technology like a toothbrush, which is, do you use it twice a day for 5 minutes? I think we should make education a toothbrush technology where we use education literally for twice a day for 5 minutes, maybe in the bathroom, maybe in transit.
A lot of economists, though, write that there is no skills gap. That's just a creation of people who want to justify not paying sufficient wages to people. If there were a skills gap, it would show up in higher wages for the underfilled jobs. What's your take on that?
You know, there's climate change deniers. I think there's skills gap deniers. McKinsey believes that by 2020 we have 85 million open jobs for skilled people that will go unfilled. So we have plenty jobs in the future. If you look at wage levels out of college, and rank different degrees you can get, the very top 15 of those will be engineering jobs, starting with petroleum engineering, moving into aeronautical engineering, nuclear engineering, solar engineering, down to computer engineering, and so on. Philosophy isn't up there in the top rank. When people look at those data, they often say, well, there has been no increase of payment between 2000 and today. But that would be indicative not of no skills gap, but no change of the skills gap. So my take is a lot of people who write these reports of lack of a skills gap, they should invest in skills and math skills to understand the data.
That's going to get tweeted. One of the arguments that I've been making for the last couple of years about the hyper-connected world is that the biggest socioeconomic impact of it is that average is officially over. That if all you ever do is all you've ever done, as they say in Texas, all you ever get is all you ever got, is no longer applicable. You will not get average anymore. There's too much software, machines, robotics, or foreign workers who can compete. But parents very often come up to me and say, look, my kid's really working hard, but he or she, they're not a superstar. What are they going to do in a world where average is over? What do you say to those parents?
I completely agree, average is over, and it's just a matter of fact. The secret of Silicon Valley is we make people more efficient, which is a euphemism for we replace human labor. And in the grand battle between machines and us people, we're getting pushed into higher and higher skill jobs because that's where the jobs are. It's easy to replace a low-skilled worker. It's much harder to replace a high-skilled worker like a New York Times columnist.
I hope.
Although it might eventually happen, not anytime soon. What I tell people is, look, what this really requires you is to take education more seriously. Today, the paradigm for education is that we have an educational phase that starts at age 5 perhaps and moves to age 24, and then we switch it off. There's no industry all my other service providers, like water companies and HMOs, they serve me for a lifetime. In higher ed, what we do is we change our handshake from this to this when you turn 24 and you graduate. I tell people, look, be prepared that education has to be part of your entire life. And be prepared that technology is changing. And it's not that in a one-time kind of proactive education you get all the skills you need. You need to stay on it. You need to stay with it. And I think it's even more pressing for people in mid-career. There's a lot of people who lose jobs, who are plenty smart and plenty capable of producing, but there's no good pathways for them to get the kind of tooling and the skills they need to re-engage.
Sebastian, whenever I bring up MOOCs, and I've written about it a lot from the very beginning, and I'm a huge believer in it, but the blowback I get from traditional education institutions is, oh, Tom, you don't understand. If you actually look at the statistics, only 5% or 10% do the course. And I always tell them two things. One is, my wife did a poetry MOOC at the University of Pennsylvania with 35,000 other students. And she would wake me up, basically, to say that she got 3 likes on her post. This thing is real, okay? That a well-taught MOOC can be incredibly compelling. And my other answer has been, look, we're in the Alta Vista stage of this industry. Google hasn't even been invented yet. This is just at the beginning, but this is real and it's coming. What's your answer?
My answer is, when I talk to institutions, that they just don't see the full potential quite yet. I feel like we live in an age where knowledge is owned by the libraries. And the librarians in the world say, we got to own the knowledge because we've been there for a long time. And they don't see that the information needs are vastly underserved. How often do we used to go to a library, and how often do we go to Google? There's an enormous market out there. We have millions of customers that have jobs, that like to stay current, that like to retool themselves, advance themselves, that really would like to find a path for education, and the institutionalized setting is just not the right solution. If you have to quit your job and go to a college for 2 years and study with 18-year-olds when you're still 45, that's just not the right solution. And as a result, learning is not part of our data fabric. We don't do lifelong learning. So my answer to all the college presidents is, wake up. You could be 10 times as big, 100 times as big. And if you don't believe it, compare libraries to Google.
You are working with companies like Google, like Facebook, and Udacity is partnering with them on education. Why do they need it, and why is that a coming trend?
So my startup company, Udacity, is all about jobs. We want people to get economic benefits to education. What better place to go to than the people who give jobs? And we go regularly to heads of engineering, CEOs, and then Carl Baers, Autodesk was mentioned before, is one of our partners, and ask them, like, what do you want? And they say, well, I'm desperate to get people with these and these and these skills. And I go back to universities and say, are you teaching those skills? They say, well, kind of, but you know, we hired our professors 20 years ago and look, wait a little bit, and we're going to do it eventually. But we do liberal arts thinking and critical thinking. And there's a space for this. But if you want to do bleeding edge education at this point in time with this velocity, it's very hard to do with tenured professors. And it's really easy to do if you get the talent out of industry that invents that technology right there. So we had, for example, Google is an example. We have a few Google classes up. They're on things that are really bleeding edge, mobile, HTML5. We had over close to 600,000 people take those classes now. And the world is really longing for an education that's really bleeding edge.
No, it's interesting. Whenever I meet higher ed people, I always say to them, look at me. Are you looking at me? Are you looking at me real closely? Everything that happened to us in the media is going to happen to you. Okay?
And they're making every single mistake that's been made in the media as well.
Sebastian, it's such a fascinating lab test. You're educating people from all over the world, 190 different countries, different ages. What are you learning from that? What are the big trends you're seeing out in the world that we need to understand here?
One of the things that I keep coming back to is the credentialing side. You mentioned this before, and Andrew did. The credentialing today is really kind of owned by institutions that have almost a Prussian model of education. Like, it takes 6 years. The median time for a bachelor degree is 6 years. So it's a lot of time. And what I see is a demand for a much more focused education, something where you don't have to quit your job, don't have to take a few years off to get the next level. And our students are asking for this. They even think our classes are way too long. What I find in industry right now, there's a real willingness to rethink the credentials and ask the question, what is the basic level at which we can accept people for labor? And it's converging to something, what half a year of work might be sufficient to get a good job. So that's an ongoing debate. We're in the middle of it right now. But what I see is going to be different going forward is that we will see credentials that are outside the academic system that carry weight.
So if you were starting 2 institutions today, knowing what you know, a K through 6 school and a university, what would they each look like, knowing what you know?
So K through 6 is something that I would love to see innovated. It's more complicated than what we do because we don't deal with adults, we deal with young kids. And that manifests itself in 2 ways, in my opinion. One is it's riskier to experiment. I don't want to put a kid into something very experimental just to find out that I set them up for failure for the rest of their life. And the second is there is a notion of physical presence necessary. You can't just put a kid in front of a cell phone and hope, or maybe you can. Maybe Minecraft will be the future of education, but I hope not. I have a 6-year-old son, and he does play Minecraft and learns a lot, but I think the social part is extremely important. What I generally believe is we have this economic model that we would like to educate kids kind of in groups, and that forces us to go at the same pace. And my great friend and a person I admire, Sal Khan, has really made this very elaborate point That's as if every single person learns riding the bicycle exactly at the same pace. And when half the people still fall off the bicycle, the end of class comes along and it's now time to learn riding the motorcycle. I'd love to see an education system where we can get people motivated and let them go at their own pace and explore the world, and through exploration do the learning. And there are schools that do this much more than traditional education. But the way the economics work is, if you put a teacher together with students, they can't pair them one-on-one, so you have to be 1 to 20. And before you realize, you have the lecture again. So to me, technology is going to be the fabric that's going to mediate this. That's going to give an experience where a student can go at their own pace on demand, and where the teacher becomes much more of a mentor than kind of a spokes organ to preach the mathematical formulas. And I think as a result, we're going to see much more engagement in disciplines where we lose kids left and right, like math and STEM.
So, but what if Udacity decided, we've been really successful, let's start a physical presence. Let's take on universities. Let's buy up a bankrupt university. There's going to be a lot of them on the market. And we'll take over their building and their athletic fields and their library. But it's going to be Udacity U in the real world. How would it be organized?
That's a great question. First of all, I'm further away from accreditation than you can imagine. And I really don't want to deal with any of this because there's complicated bureaucracy and regulations that make life really hard. But say we had a physical location. We actually have an example. We have an entrepreneur, Professor Steve Blank, who has been teaching a class on how to do the lean startup. And it's been a class that's been so popular. It's being taught at 70 universities, like UC Berkeley, Princeton level universities. And the National Science Foundation has made this its kind of role model class, endorsed class for business education. What he found is that about 90% of the time spent is easily digitized, and 10% isn't.
So explain that. What do you mean by that?
So easily digitized is my name is Steve, what are your names? Let me teach you the basics. He has something called a business canvas. Let me explain you what that is. That explanation is the same for every class and every year.
Total commodity.
So it's a complete waste that he does this over and over again. Disrespect to himself to give the same lecture twice, in my opinion. But then there's this moment where the kids go out and have to do something. They have to collect business data, pitch a startup, and he has to literally tear them apart and rip them apart and tell them what they're doing wrong and send them out again, and they come back doing it again. And they get personalized feedback. This personalized feedback is extremely valuable and cannot be easily replaced by a machine at this point. So what he does now is he has this class on Udacity. It's a business class. You can take it. It's recorded. It's somewhat interactive, but doesn't provide the level of interactivity for the last part. And then the kids come in for a weekend or for 5 days. And the very first meeting is, here are my results. Tear me apart. And his very first response is, here's why your results are wrong. Let me tell you. And it's actually really interesting. The actual critical interaction is really important, but it's a small fraction of the overall experience. As we all know, with kids in college age, you go to a major university, chemistry 101, English 101, you're sitting in a lecture hall with 300 other kids, and from the third row on, you're already in distance education.
It's a cool way to think of it. Will I be able to, I was looking for my cell phone here for a second. I mean, are we heading for a world where I can get Udacity on this?
On the iPhone? Yeah, it's just free right now. It's in the App Store, and the Google Android version will launch during Google I/O.
So I can literally be taking a course in the 30-minute ride on the bus to or from school.
And that's what most of our students actually do. They take courses and fit them into their busy lifestyle, right? So I tell kids, look, you could do Candy Crush or Angry Birds, right? Or you could do the same in Udacity and get a job, right? And get an employable skill. Whereas, you learn physics in Angry Birds, but the physics are all wrong and they don't really help you with the job. So perhaps do this, not this.
So we've got a couple of college presidents in the hall. What's your advice to them right now?
I think open your mind towards, if you're a college president, open your minds to not think of your campus population as your market, but as the world. If you change your business model to indicate the world, which is what Udacity does, you'll have the largest business ever built in the college space, in my opinion. The reason why I believe this so firmly is the way it's set up today, it's very hard to get in, it's very exclusive, it's very petite, And we're really not reaching the market either geographically or age-wise. The market is 100 times as big. Think of yourself not as defending the libraries of the future. Think of yourself as building the Google of the future. And then all of a sudden you find that the amount of engagement in knowledge acquisition is going to go up by a factor of 1,000 or more. And as a result, you'll be a really great player. Now, I've said this to many college presidents, and I yet have to find someone who says, yep, we'll do it. The closest we got was Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was willing to cut the costs of a master's degree from about $45,000 to $6,600. They're running on our platform. They're working with us on this. We have more than 1,000 students. We hope to have 10,000 students at some point in the future. But it's been a thorny game for universities. They would have to give up their credentials and really change their business model and likely take a dip in rankings for a while this retooling takes place.
I had a fascinating experience. 10 days ago, I was the commencement speaker at the American University in Kurdistan. And they are using MOOCs already. This is in Suleimania, and in northern Iraq. And it reminded me, being there, something I felt after the Arab Spring, after covering Tahrir Square, is that what the Arab Spring was all about, in my view, and what so many of these square movements is about, is young people living, in this highly, interconnected world, seeing how other people live, and realizing they're living in a context that does not allow them to realize their full potential. And I think, my view, nothing makes people more revolutionary than that. Not food, not money, not hunger. It's when I feel I can be something more than I am, and I'm living in this context that doesn't allow me to do it. And one of the things I always thought about is, like, we have the potential with companies, like Udacity and Coursera and edX, to really change the whole foreign aid model. That what if Udacity just rented a building in Aswan, Egypt, put in a set of computers linked to the internet, and maybe had a TA there, and just invited Egyptian students to take any course in the world from that building in Aswan.
It's actually, I love what you say, and when we work with companies like Facebook and Google and Autodesk, the idea of democratizing education is the #1 reason why companies work with us. It's not workforce employment, it's not getting more money, getting more talent. That's a nice thing to do, but the idea of helping people in the world. I would go a step further. The smartphone is on the rise, and it's continents like Africa are skipping over the internet age and the building age straight into the smartphone age. And all it takes today to be part of it is a smartphone. So you can embrace an existing trend and reach many more people than you could do with a building, and really get enormous velocity. That's what we are seeing in our place. We are surprised. Our second biggest city is Bangalore, and we don't have a place in Bangalore. But guess what? Young Indians crave for unfolding their potential. They see there's a place where you can get taught by Cloudera and the best in industry. They'll soon, hopefully, will see that they can get jobs there that are earmarked for this education. And that's just a big driving factor. To me, the true globalization is by using what you said in the beginning, the successor of the book, so to speak, use the internet as your instrument of reaching people. And that's going at an astounding pace right now.
Sebastian, I'm sure there's a few questions out there, so let's turn to the audience. We're going to bring the mics in, and just want to invite people to engage here. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Robert Johnson.
One of our college presidents. Robert, fully introduce yourself.
I'm Robert Johnson from Becker College in Massachusetts. And I'm curious, when you think about your model, how do you build in, we're working with students for jobs that do not yet exist. So we have to give them skills in divergent thinking, social and emotional intelligence, entrepreneurial outlook, and what have you. How do we build that into this MOOC model?
I think there's challenges that we have, and what we found is if we just survey a student with a MOOC on the computer program, it's actually not that good. And I'm happy to admit this. By any metric you might apply, what we've done at Udacity, we put a service layer around it. We really sharpen people's social skills, interactive skills, give them human feedback, give them contact, and all of a sudden you see kind of finishing rates go from 3% to about 60 to 70%. That said, I don't think we should think of MOOCs as kind of replacement, the same way we shouldn't think of television as a replacement for radio or film as a replacement for the theater stage. They're different things, and they're good at different things. In the MOOC land, I can reach people very quickly with something very up-to-date and fit this in the busy lives of busy people to help them with their skills that they need. For me, it's much harder to give them an education on social skills that require physical presence. So I don't know whether it's going to play out in the end. I think we should experiment. We should use these technologies. But I think there's a conjunction of both of these things that will make the pie much larger and also makes students much, much better in their ability to take new skills.
So we got a lot of questions, so let's do real quick, short questions and
Short
real
answers.
short answers, because I really want to get through as many as we can. Please, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Daisy Swan. I'm a career coach in Los Angeles. I really appreciate the dialogue. I have a friend whose child is, almost adult, getting a degree online on gamification. And they've been really puzzling, does he need to go on and get a BA in addition to be able to get a job? And I think that's where we have employers who are still looking for a certain level of certification or credibility.
Yeah, I think what we'll see in the future, in the near future, is a shift where even employers will go and say, we're happy to accept alternative credentials. We'll see basically a bit of a loss of return on investment for degrees, and it's been well documented in the media. The costs have been going up by about 7% year in, year out for the last 30 years. And I believe we're at an inflection point where many parents ask the same question. We mentioned this morning that you mentioned, Tom, that about half the college kids get jobs that they wouldn't need the degree for. I feel this is like a perfect storm right now. All these things are brewing, and they're all coinciding. And we're just in the eye of the storm right now. I think the world in 3 years from now will be fundamentally different from the way it is today.
Great.
Jenny Jackson, Dallas, Texas, and my question is a follow-up. The whole issue of credentialing is key. I'm a big supporter of MOOCs, but getting employers to accept not credentials or alternative credentials is really the key to giving away that lifeline of a BA or a master's. So is the MOOC community getting together and creating a standard that employers might accept, because I know you talk to them a lot, that would allow someone to abandon traditional education, go to a MOOC with some certainty of a documented credential?
Yeah, so we are in the middle of a very vivid discussion. It's not my place right now to kind of release the details because they're being discussed, but stay tuned. They'll be released next Monday. There's actually interesting data. In many cases, our classes attract large numbers of students, but a small number of students is very engaged and does great projects. And we placed many of them in jobs. And very often, the answer has been, specifically from startup companies, that they really care about what these employees can do once they're there and care less about their pedigree. Now, it's a two-sided sword because to some extent, we have to communicate to employers what this means. And getting a certificate or a badge right now is a very ambiguous term. So we can easily place people who are taking an NVIDIA class inside NVIDIA, but we can't place them easily in other companies. And I think that's going to change. There's a lot of mass right now, critical mass at this moment, where employers say, look, we are impatient. We want a fast way. We want something for our workers. We want something for the world. And we are ready to jump to a new credentialing system.
Please.
Hello, my name is Mark Harris. I'm from the University of California at Merced. We've got 16 of our students here with us today from the Great Central Valley. The emphasis has to shift, in my opinion, from credential acquisition to knowledge acquisition. We talk out of both sides of our mouths when we talk to kids about this dilemma. I don't know any parent who asks a kid, what did you learn at the university? They ask them what grade they earned or how close are you to getting your BA. How can we bring MOOC technology more into the classroom? That model's not going to change anytime soon. How can we be more effective using
Look,
MOOCs?
I'm around. Let's chat. I'm a big fan of anything revolutionary that makes us rethink this. I completely agree. We should really not teach for the grade. We should teach for the skill, for the mastery. We should not teach for the schedule. It blows my mind that Tuesday comes along and all the kids have to learn polynomials. So I think for all of us as a community, as a world community, we should start experimenting. To some extent, the higher education field has been just about as slowly moving as perhaps churches and governments. And I think it's time to get over this and really ask the question, shall we move forward? We saw this recent landmark case just 2 days ago in California against tenure as being unconstitutional. And no matter which way this goes, I think there's a pressure on society to say, we got to innovate. We can't stay in the 19th century and what we do today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Arbeit. I'm from San Francisco, California. I do education research at RTI International, and I've been studying MOOCs specifically. And I've heard you talk a lot about democratization. But the research that came out on Monday from the Gates grants mostly said that most of the people participating in MOOCs around the world even, they have a college education. They are more privileged wherever they are. How do we reach the students that really do have barriers to getting the skills, the kids who are growing up in Bayview and Hunters Point here in San Francisco?
Yeah, the mistake I think that's often been made is to judge a new technology on day one. And that's probably because we are on day one, so that's the best perspective we can take. But in many of these technologies, you'll find that the early adopters are different from the final adopters. So the iPhone was adopted by technologist geeks like myself and eventually made it into everyone's life in some sense. And this has the potential to do the same because the way the economics work and distribution work, it might not be the case that every high school kid today learns on a smartphone, but they can do it. We've been working with Bill and Melinda Gates, with the Emerson Collective, and several others to bring our education specifically to minority groups in inner city schools. And we've seen some stunning results. We've also seen some bad results, to be honest. But we had kids in Texas. We had 2 girls in Texas who are at risks, finish a Udacity class within 2 weeks each, whereas they would fail in physical classes. This kind of online medium gave them more privacy to be protected from what girls are often exposed to in the classroom. And to me, this is more like a call to arms. We got to explore, we got to see. I see no reason why the trend that the early adopters are from this group of people would prevent these group of people to engage this kind of education. Specifically, I mean, the Middle East. I mean, we chatted about this offline a little bit. I believe that, I completely agree with Tom, that the aspiration to unfold your potential is a big part of kind of driving young people in the right direction. And this technology can bring top-notch education to everybody, including the Middle East. And if we succeed in this, we might have an impact on how the world works.
I'm going to ask that we have 2 on each side. I want to ask everyone to ask their question, and you give sort of one mega answer just so we can wrap it up. So those 2 over there, and then we'll go back to here. Yeah, real quick, just if you could each ask your question.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Najm Mishkati. I'm a professor of engineering at USC. I've been teaching for 25 years with Blackboard and chalk, but at the same time, for the first time, I taught a course on internet, which is called Distance Education Network. My problem is this. You mentioned about personalized feedback, which is extremely important. I've been giving a copy of an article from Harvard Business Review many years ago called Human Moment. And that talks about face-to-face. How do you replace that personalized feedback in the internet thing, which is very valuable on that thing?
Great. Ann?
Sebastian, I think what your wife's doing at Stanford is so interesting, and I think talking a little bit about how to use technology in that way would be illustrative as well. Thanks.
And please, over here.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Stephen Liu from University of Southern California. I'm an educator. I have been following MOOC movement with great interest. I think today we're not really debating whether MOOC is real or not. It is real. I think the debate is whether a coursework equal to education and education equal to learning. I think MOOC is a great question. It asks us, how should we better learn? How should we better educate? But MOOC is not an answer. And I really believe that now, I think the whole world is MOOCing. We should ask ourselves, what's going to happen to all the classroom we have built in our university after the whole world is MOOCing out? What are we going to do with this classroom? In the first session, we talk about in the 20th century is really people to thing. 21st century is people to people. I think the same argument can be applied to education learning. That is, in the 20th century, learning is mostly student to course. But in the 21st century, learning is about student to student, people to people. So we now have a program now link the classroom, live classroom together on campuses. We have a consortium of 10 universities on 5 continents. A total of 350,000 students now can join a live class together to discuss their thought. As a matter of fact, all our students take your MOOC courses before they come to discussion. I think that is really the way we can complement this great move invention. Thank you.
Thank you. Fred, close this up.
Fred Astron, I'm a professor at San Francisco State, the city's university. All of this is about delivering knowledge, but this kind of disruption that you're talking about also affects the production of knowledge. And professors do both, and we're only really talking about one part of what they do. So how does this whole discussion affect that dimension?
Good question.
So it's going to be hard to give a consistent answer, but two thoughts. First of all, I would never phrase this as a question, how does it replace? That's just the wrong question to ask. As I said, television never replaced radio. They're different, and they meet different needs. We should ask, how can we serve the students in the world better using this technology? That's the way I would look at the question. And then you find that the answers will be different. We will not replace, we will augment and extend. But the second most thought I have is when I taught my Stanford AI class, and I had 200 students on a physical campus and was working in the nights between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. to make these online classes, interactive online classes. About 170 of my 200 students stopped showing up to class. And I got them in for the midterm and for the final, and I went around and said, what's happening? You guys paying $50,000 a year to see me, the famous professor. And they said, you know what? We prefer you on tape. I said, what? And they said things like, we can watch you in the privacy of our dorm in the evening, but also, like, if I don't get something, you can rewind you. Then we looked at the data. We have students that watch the same little segment for 40 times in a row. And it takes them 40 times to understand this thing. And finally, they get it. But in the classroom, you can't raise your arm 40 times and say, Professor, please, sorry, again, please, right? It's much easier to switch off and then go blank, and this happens to many students. The outcome of this was staggering. I always thought of myself as a great professor teaching in Stanford, also very good looking and smart and all these things. But when I was replaced with my own videotape, the average grade level went up, not down, significantly. Wow. And I was shocked. So I always felt I was doing a great job, and I had a great ethos, and I really cared about passion education. And something as simple as a set of videotapes and exercises are better than me. That made me think.
You know, Sebastian's going to be outside. We didn't get to everyone. Just quickly, Anne's question about your wife.
My wife is an English scholar, and half the time she's troubled to be married to someone who is in the news being called all kinds of names. And the other half of the time, she actually explores digital media for education. And one thing she does recently is in teaching Oscar Wilde and a certain part of Victorian literature, she actually went in and made a role play where people could reenact those classical roles and become Dorian Gray and so on. And she made it on Twitter. So she went to the world and said, hey, world, if you want to be part of reenacting in a play and redoing the fiction of it, come and take a role and play with us. And several thousand people showed up and made this unbelievably vibrant role play that put literature, something that's generally by its definition kind of somewhat past, and made it very active and very alive. And very quickly it moved from Dorian Gray into contemporary issues like gay and lesbian rights and so on. And you could see characters from the past commenting on the present. And the students involved, they were blown away. They felt this was the best experience ever, to be part of a play, not just reading it and consuming it, but building it. She's repeated it several times since. This fall, she and I will actually teach a joint course at Stanford specifically to do humanities work and see if we can bring technology in humanities. And I have no answers. I don't know what the solution is. But we got to try and really see if we can do new things.
Sebastian, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Great.